This is the first and only orbital-class rocket booster to land and be reused. SpaceX's Falcon 9 first stage. It first successfully landed on December 22, 2015, and as of the release of this video, it has done so more than 400 times in 15 years of service. To this day, no one can repeat this engineering feat. Many experts consider it an industry-disrupting technology, enabling SpaceX to dominate the worldwide launch market. And this is Starship, SpaceX's next rocket currently in development. It's the largest rocket ever flown. When finished, it's meant to be completely reusable and it doesn't have legs to land on. But why? Why would SpaceX get rid of the one technology that gives it that industry-leading rocket? Why would they risk catching the Starship with a giant tower? Why would they switch from legs to a giant catch tower if they're comfortably in the lead? This is the story of how and why SpaceX made its own greatest invention obsolete. Why is SpaceX ditching the legs? My name is Felix, welcome to What About It, let's dive right in. So, how did they do it? How did SpaceX become so dominant in the space industry? Rocketry isn't a new thing anymore. In fact, it all started almost 800 years ago. At this time, the Chinese and the Mongols were at war. During the Battle of Kaikeng, the Chinese repelled the Mongol invaders with a barrage of arrows of flying fire. These fire arrows were a simple form of a solid propellant rocket, comparable to today's firework rockets. Mongol barbecue became a thing and rocketry was born. Fast forward to March 16, 1926 in Auburn, Massachusetts. This is Robert Goddard, an American physicist and rocketry pioneer. He's about to launch his greatest invention, the first ever liquid-propelled rocket. 800 years have passed since a bunch of very surprised Mongols found out that arrows of fire are a thing now. Many consider this the beginning of modern rocketry. The leap from a very simple solid fuel-based arrow of fire to a complex machine utilizing liquid fuel to propel itself was a giant leap back in 1920s Auburn, Massachusetts. It paved the way for everything to come after it, all the way up to today. Of course, today it's way more sophisticated. This is the latest and greatest from United Launch Alliance, one of the biggest traditional launch providers in the world. This is ULA's Falcon rocket. Many consider it second after SpaceX in the US rocket launch market. Falcon is competing with Falcon 9, and even though it's brand new and had its maiden launch just over a year ago, it's failing to keep up with SpaceX. Since its first launch at the beginning of 2024, it launched once again on October 4th of the same year. That's it. By comparison, SpaceX's Falcon 9 launched 132 times in 2024. That's every 3 days. But how is this possible? Falcon is considered cutting-edge and high-tech. It is made from forged aluminum and equipped with 2 state-of-the-art Blue Origin BE-4 engines in its first stage. This methane-powered beast can lift 27 tons to low Earth orbit on a single launch. That's almost 4.5 tons more than what Falcon 9 can lift to low Earth orbit, and it looks way fancier. How is this not better than this? The answer is easy and complicated at the same time. It's reusability. Consider this. You've done your vacation planning, a big trip to another continent. You're all excited. You get to the airport, board your plane with all the other travelers, and fly to your dream destination. Great! Once you arrive in paradise, your plane's doors open in mid-air. Flight attendants hand everyone a parachute, and you and your fellow travelers jump out of the plane. The last thing you see before you hopefully land on the ground safely is the plane crashing into the ocean. Let's play a guessing game. What would that trip cost you? The math is simple. Let's use an Airbus A320 for this comparison, as by numbers it's the most common modern airliner and it has a nice round average price of $100 million per plane. Now remember, the plane isn't being reused for your trip. It's only one trip for our brave Airbus, and then it's a submarine, at best a high-tech coral reef, but likely just a big debris field floating in the ocean. So we divide the $100 million by 186, the number of passengers it can carry in its largest version. That's a very inconvenient ticket price of more than $500,000 and some change. I bet that is way above your travel budget. Few people could afford to take a flight on this plane just to get somewhere. Heck, we haven't even talked about the return trip. Imagine what else you could do with this money. Screw planes, I'll take the car. The only reason you can get not just a one-way ticket, but even the return flight for around $500, which is 0.1% of our non-reusable A320, is, you got it, reusability. No plane drops into the ocean at its destination. That's madness. There aren't any parachutes involved either. I mean, at least I hope so. Instead, it lands. You and your luggage get out, the plane is cleaned, refueled, and restocked with some questionable dinner selections, and on we go. Another 186 passengers are looking forward to a nice trip for cheap money. We have an environment that is so competitive, using mass-manufactured vehicles, that this CEO even claims that he'd make seats optional if he could.
Did you want to make passengers stand on planes to fit more people in, a la the tube?
Yes.
What? ULA's shiny and brand new Falcon rocket is the plane that falls into the water. SpaceX's Falcon 9 is the one that lands. Granted, not all of it lands, but we'll get to that part in a moment. And that's how we end up with one of the leaders in the launch industry launching its rocket twice in a year, and SpaceX launching 130 times over the same period. Reusability has some significant advantages. Among others, it drops the price. Buying one ULA Falcon and launching it into space costs you $110 million. In comparison, the most recent information shows that a Falcon 9 launch costs only around $67 million. The cost per kilogram to low Earth orbit for a ULA Falcon rocket is roughly $4,000. SpaceX's Falcon 9 does the same for less than $3,000. Screw those 5 tons extra, this is very cheap for a giant rocket going to space for you. In addition, SpaceX always has a booster ready. They don't need to build a new one every time, they can reuse an old one. This allows for a much faster launch cadence. SpaceX can even replace a malfunctioning booster on the fly. On the Astranis From One to Many mission, they had a post-ignition abort on the launch pad, and within 8 days they had the payload and the upper stage up on a different booster. ULA couldn't possibly build a complete Falcon rocket every 3 days, which was SpaceX's Falcon 9 launch cadence in 2024, as mentioned before. SpaceX's current record holder, Falcon 9 booster B1067, has launched and landed 25 times so far. You can tell by looking at the soot cover. The darker the booster, the more flights it has done. This booster is basically the Chuck Norris of rockets.
Sure, honey.
It flew first on June 3rd, 2021 for the commercial resupply mission 22 towards the ISS, and last on January 10th, 2025 for a Starlink launch. It's flown every 54.87 days since it was introduced to SpaceX's fleet. But we're not trying to praise Chuck Rocket, we're trying to solve the leg question. Falcon 9 boosters land on legs. 4 of them flip out just before it sets down either on a drone ship in the middle of the ocean or back at a so-called landing zone next to the pad it launched from. It's a simple but very effective solution. The legs lock into place when deployed, making them reliable. They're also lightweight and durable, which is very important for a rocket. It's an easy-looking trick, but don't be fooled. There is a reason why no one else has been able to copy this on an orbital-class booster in almost a decade. Landing a rocket coming back from space is extremely difficult. The forces and temperatures such a booster must endure for minutes on each flight are right on the edge of what's possible with today's tech. An Airbus A320 has a much easier time. All this is realized through a delicate play between engineering design, software programming, and physics. There is no doubt that SpaceX's Falcon 9 is a marvel of engineering second to none in today's rocketry. SpaceX's story started with Falcon 1, a very crude and simple rocket. Its only purpose was to reach orbit and demonstrate to the US Department of Defense that this private space company could reach orbit. Until 2006, something like this had only been accomplished twice. Conestoga, the world's first privately funded rocket, launched 3 times between 1981 and 1995. Then there was Orbital Science's air-launched Pegasus, which flew 45 times between 1990 and 2021. Both were from the US and both were rather small and not fully liquid-fueled, which is considered the most difficult rocket type to master. However, SpaceX's goal was different. Falcon 1 first launched on March 24, 2006. It launched a total of 4 times from a small island in the Pacific Ocean. 3 of these launches were failures and almost drove a very young SpaceX into bankruptcy.
3, 2, 1, 0.
The 4th launch on July 14, 2009 left a deep mark in spaceflight history. It was the first time a privately funded company reached an orbit around Earth with a fully liquid-fueled rocket. After this, SpaceX immediately retired Falcon 1. Remember, this was just a demonstrator. The real deal was Falcon 9, named after the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars and the number of engines in its first stage. Its first flight in the V1.0 configuration commenced on June 4, 2010, and it was a success. SpaceX had demonstrated that a private company could develop, produce, and launch a medium-lift launch vehicle. But if there is one thing true about SpaceX, it's that nothing is ever good enough. Falcon 9 V1.0 wasn't supposed to be the final product. SpaceX began testing what is known as the Grasshopper as early as 2011. Only 1 year after accomplishing one almost impossible task, SpaceX could be seen working on the next one: a reusable orbital first-stage booster. Back then, experts saw this as a mostly futile endeavor. No one believed that SpaceX could actually lead this project to success. The answer was relatively simple. Large players in the aerospace industry had deemed it impossible. SpaceX continued though. In 2012, they began publicly discussing rapidly reusable rockets with the ultimate goal of one day reaching Mars. Standing 32 meters tall, Grasshopper, this fool's errand of a prototype, began its first low-altitude hover and landing tests in September 2012. It had some non-retractable legs attached to a Falcon 9 version 1 first stage tank and a single Merlin 1D engine. According to Musk, it could ascend and land back on the ground with the precision of a helicopter. This was more than what anyone else could do at the time. But nothing was ever good enough, and some epic goals were already visible on the horizon. SpaceX transitioned to the F9R, which utilized a 49-meter-tall Falcon 9 V1.1 first-stage tank. This was a substantial upgrade compared to the Grasshopper. The F9R sported retractable legs with a total span of approximately 18 meters. The legs also weighed less than those on the first Grasshopper at only 2,100 kilograms, and it had 3 engines instead of 1. Grasshopper flew a total of 8 times. It retired, and F9R had an accident on its 5th and final flight. A blocked sensor caused the vehicle to leave its intended path, activating the flight termination system. It's important to note that SpaceX completely self-funded the initial testing, with money from outside the company only becoming an influence later on. No one told SpaceX to do this, and no one gave them a contract. Their motivation was based on the insane-sounding goal of sending humans to Mars. And not just that, SpaceX wants to build a self-sustained city on Mars, turning humanity into a multiplanetary species in the process. It took SpaceX 25 launches in total to set the next impossible milestone. December 21st, 2015 was a day to go down in the history of spaceflight. After numerous failed attempts to land a Falcon 9 booster after an orbital launch, this happened. SpaceX Orbcomm OG-2M2 made it back down again, landing a booster that had just delivered payload back at the landing zone LZ-1 at the Cape Canaveral station. To this day, no one has copied a feat that took SpaceX 2 crude prototypes and 20 Falcon 9 launches to figure out. The rest is history. We've come a long way from China roasting Mongols. But if all this is so incredible already, then why even improve on it? Why did SpaceX not just stop after Falcon 9? Let's take a look at the landed booster again. Something seems to be missing here. Wasn't that rocket larger when it launched? Yes, it was. It's missing something. Something it needed to leave behind in space before landing. Falcon 9 is a two-stage rocket. It's basically made of two rockets stacked on top of each other. Both have engines, tanks, computers,
TL hot.
the whole deal. One is called the booster or first stage and the other is called the upper or second stage. We do this to reduce excess weight on all orbital rockets. Because once a booster is empty, what's the point of dragging it into space only to spend more fuel, money, and reduce our actual payload? You know, the stuff you want to get into space.
I know what you mean.
So at roughly 66 to 71 kilometers in altitude, Falcon 9 splits in half.
Break, snap.
Like a Kit Kat. The booster returns to the surface and the upper stage pushes on to reach the needed orbital velocity of at least 27,000 kilometers per hour to stay up there. Even though our Chuck rocket booster B-1067 flew 25 times, its friend, the upper stage, didn't make it back. Not once. That's a bad track record. The reason is simple. The speed the upper stage has to reach to get into a stable orbit is so high that a deorbit with reuse in mind becomes a whole other challenge compared to the booster, which travels at just around 8,000 kilometers per hour when separating. That's less than a third of the speed compared to the upper stage. It's tough but doable, but the upper stage can't simply be recovered like this. It would need a heat shield comparable to an astronaut's crew capsule and parachutes. It would also need to slow down first to re-enter the atmosphere, which requires tanks filled with extra fuel. This would make the small upper stage so heavy and oversized that it could no longer carry a payload, defeating the rocket's purpose. Remember how I said that a ticket on a reusable Airbus A320 only costs 0.1% of the money it costs to buy the plane? That's because an A320 looks exactly the same when taking off and when landing again. The only differences are empty tanks, tired travelers, and some poor insects on the windshield. It brings all its parts back down again. It doesn't jettison its wings or split in half mid-flight. It is fully reusable. That is why it is very cheap to get a seat and why it can almost immediately fly again after dropping you off in paradise. Well, some brilliant people at SpaceX realized that making a rocket fully reusable takes more than 4 legs. Enter Starship. It takes a heat shield on the upper stage, large fuel tanks, and a rocket's upper stage so massive that it can be lifted into space and brought back down again. SpaceX did skip the parachutes as they couldn't be reused and added 4 large flaps. After a fiery re-entry, a Starship falls through the sky like a skydiver, controlling its descent with these flaps, and the entire body of the upper stage is used to reduce speed. They also skipped something else, which brings us to the initial question. Are you ready? Why would SpaceX switch from legs to a catch? Why would they get rid of those beautiful Chuck Norris legs? Do the Mongols have something to do with this? SpaceX conducted 11 Starship high-altitude flight tests between 2019 and 2021, not dissimilar to what they did with the Grasshopper and F9R, or their Falcon 9 rocket. In the beginning, there was Starhopper. It looked like an effigy of R2-D2 from Star Wars. It took the same approach as the initial Grasshopper prototype from 2012, large legs and 1 Raptor engine attached to a simple tank setup. And it flew 4 times, twice tethered to the ground for safety and 2 times in free flight up to 150 meters.
3, 2, 1.
After this, SpaceX introduced the SN Starships. SN5 to SN15 flew from 2020 to 2021 and reached altitudes ranging from 150 meters all the way to 12.5 kilometers. And all of them had legs, but no arms, but legs. And they came in different shapes. The Starhopper had huge triangular legs attached to the sides, and the early SN Starships had little stumpy flip-out legs. Even if they might initially look simple, rocket legs are a complex engineering challenge. They need to provide a wide stance, as a rocket has a high center of mass and would otherwise topple over easily after landing. They also need to dampen the landing, introducing even more challenges. The early Starship's stumpy legs had crush blocks inside, structures meant to bend and crumble under the force of the landing impact. These blocks were non-reusable and would need to be replaced after every landing. They introduce extra weight and need a place to go. You can't fit much more into a Starship engine section than these tiny stumpers. There's no room to spare. And those tiny legs aren't enough for an orbital return, so they'd need to go on the outside again, similar to what SpaceX ended up using on Falcon 9. This introduces drag and poses a challenge during re-entry. There is a problem. Protecting moving parts with a heat shield is incredibly difficult. This is something that NASA discovered during the Space Shuttle program. Its aerodynamic surfaces had hinges, which needed to be protected against the heat of re-entry. The hinges introduced movable parts into an otherwise seamless heat shield. SpaceX and Elon Musk stated numerous times that Falcon 9 legs aren't a great solution. They enable them to land the boosters, but they introduce challenges at the same time and make the turnaround time of a Falcon 9 booster considerably longer. It's a hassle, even if it's the only solution available for a landing rocket so far. And so SpaceX pressed delete. They got rid of them. In fact, those stumpy legs on the SN Starships were never meant to be used on the finished product. They were just for testing. When SpaceX announced that it would build a giant robot called Mechazilla in the dunes of Boca Chica, Texas to catch a rocket coming back from space out of mid-air, many experts thought it impossible. Remember Falcon 9? This seems to be a recurring pattern. SpaceX states its plans and the world of experts says it can't be done. Here's another historic date in spaceflight history, October 13th, 2024. SpaceX launches Starship 30 on top of its Super Heavy Booster 12 with the goal of catching a 35-story tall rocket booster screaming back down to Earth at over 8,000 kilometers per hour. 98 years after Robert Goddard launched his tiny liquid-fueled rocket into the sky in Auburn, Massachusetts, SpaceX caught a 200-ton and 70-meter tall stainless steel monster out of mid-air in the dunes of South Texas with giant chopsticks. And they did it on the first try, demonstrating that legs aren't needed for a reusable rocket. In a nutshell, these are its main advantages. Less weight on the rocket, fewer parts and thus less complexity, and a solution that potentially works for both the rocket's first and second stages. Even though it might seem more complicated than Falcon 9 style legs, it actually isn't. The rocket can tip over after landing, its heat shield can be designed without extra seams, and the rocket becomes lighter and less complex. SpaceX even calls its launch infrastructure for Starship the tower and the launch mount Stage 0. It's part of the rocket, but it stays on the ground. Skipping leg day enables SpaceX to continue with its plan. A rapidly and fully reusable rocket is the goal. Falcon 9 with its legs is reusable, but not rapidly and fully. I think there is a problem though. Remember SpaceX's initial goal? Starship is supposed to make humanity a multi-planetary species. This means it's supposed to land on the moon for NASA as the HLS or Human Landing System for Artemis, and on Mars for the grand goal of building a self-sustaining city on the Red Planet. So why will Starship still need legs in the future? The last time I checked, there were no giant rocket-catching Mechazilla robots on the moon and Mars. Building something of that size and weight in space, let alone on the moon or Mars, far exceeds our current capabilities. The no-legs approach is only suitable for Earth, at least for now. The lunar Starship and an interplanetary variant that will go to Mars will need legs. These legs will likely be similar to those found on a Falcon 9, but as reusable as possible. Non-reusable crunch blocks won't do, and they'll need to retract on their own when the rocket takes off again. After all, you do want to return your astronauts from the moon and Mars, right? That's exactly what SpaceX is developing right now. The first flight of a lunar Starship is still slated for 2025, but will likely be postponed to 2026. But SpaceX's renders already tell the story. Legs. So even though SpaceX was able to eliminate legs on rockets for launches and returns to Earth by utilizing a revolutionary robot catch approach, legs on rockets are here to stay. SpaceX's story is second to none in spaceflight history. What started as a good way to roast some Mongols might be the single most important step in our technological evolution. The ability to leave Earth, the cradle of human civilization, and explore the unknown has led us to a turning point. Part of this turning point is SpaceX's decision to make its greatest invention obsolete, those beautiful Falcon 9 legs. That's it for today. If you liked the story of how Chuck Norris defeated the Mongols, remember to smash that like button. Subscribe for more. This is what fuels the algorithm. This is how you can help us for free. Check out our epic shirts in your favorite Space Nerd store. A new Raptor design and our brand new Starship Block 2 design are both up. Link is in the description and in the card you should see now. Also check out our print store at shop.whataboutit.space to buy a picture for your favorite wall. A significant amount of every purchase goes directly to our photographers, and if you want to learn more about the fascinating story of SpaceX's Raptor 3 engine, watch this video next to continue your journey. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next episode. A huge thanks goes out to My Radar. Our work and SpaceX's work at Starbase depend on one obvious factor: weather. It can be a huge hassle when working to capture that perfect shot of a rocket launch or when reporting about the daily workings at Starbase. My Radar gave us advanced warnings allowing us to prepare for every storm and flooding, and we still make every launch stream happen while tracking the Starship at the same time. All with one completely free app, My Radar. We use My Radar to track weather risks for our 24/7 cameras and to keep the Y team at Starbase safe. We monitor the weather closely with My Radar, which helps us track the clear skies that follow. It's incredible how much planning goes into launching a Starship. My Radar makes it easier. It does the same for you. With My Radar, you can track storms, set up custom alerts, monitor wildfires, and even follow orbital objects like Mars rovers, which is easily my favorite feature. Winter is here, Jon Snow. You're late. Track the cold. Know when to switch to winter tires and when to put on your extra warm jacket. Whether you're gearing up for a rocket launch or staying ahead of the cold, My Radar has got you covered. Click the link in the description to download it for free and stay informed about what's coming your way. My Radar is also your radar. Remember how I said that a ticket on a reusable Airbus A320 only costs 0.1% of the money it costs to scroll the text out of the screen?